Welcome to a new episode of Ledertips. Our guest today is Alexander Osterwalder. He's one of the world's top management thinkers, currently ranking number 4 out of 50 on Thinkers 50. He's a keynote speaker, best-selling author, selling millions of books, and also maybe most famous for having created the business model canvas. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So I'm, very passionate about innovation. I know you are too. And how come big companies fail at innovation?
So the number one reason is because they're so good at what they're doing, right? So established companies, small or large, actually have one goal, which is to optimize what they're already good at. So that's the key thing. And that means they're going to develop antibodies against anything that looks different. So being great is actually the root of future failure. So what you need to do is stay humble and constantly reinvent yourself, because, and this was maybe not the case, 20, 30 years ago, the world is pretty disruptive out there, and data shows that startups are better funded than ever before. So there's real data showing that, whoa, it's getting a bit dangerous, because these young startups are usually better funded than corporate innovation teams, because innovation is not the same thing as R&D. So if you, as an established company, don't reinvent yourself, you're really at risk. You're really at risk. And we see this from all our clients across the world.
And you come up with the book, The Invincible Company. What's the core message of that book when it comes to innovation?
Very arrogant title, right? And the point is, you become invincible the moment you accept you can't be invincible. So the only thing you can do is constantly rethink what you're doing. So I'm going to quickly just show, with a couple of bullet points here, what an invincible company is. There are actually 3 characteristics. And the first one sounds trivial, hard to do. Invincible companies reinvent themselves while they're successful. That's the key word, right? Because it's easier when you have a really burning platform, though it's very risky. But what's hard is when you're successful. The second characteristic, and this already gets pretty hard here, they don't just compete on technology innovation and product innovation. They build superior business models. And while they're managing successful business models, they know they're going to expire like a yogurt in the fridge. So they already reinvent new business models. They come up with new ones or renovate the old ones, right? That back to point 1. But the hardest, really the hardest, is that really great companies, you can't put them easily into a box anymore. They're transcending industry boundaries. A lot of people who've done business school, when you went to MBAs, they were taught the 5 forces, right? Industry forces shape your business. Well, it turns out that's 1985. It's kind of over. Today, leading companies, they shape industries. They make industries. You're the driving force if you understand how this works. So that's how, invincible companies operate. And it makes them invincible because they remain humble. So it's pretty challenging to build that, but we now know how to do it. That's the good news. So there's enough knowledge out there. There are enough mistakes that were made that we now know how to do it. Now it's really a leadership commitment thing. When leadership commits, this is possible. And there are great examples out there where you have companies that transformed. It's not just those that were, you could say, digital natives, that started with an innovation culture like Netflix. No, it's even possible for established companies.
And do you have an example of a company that's been through that transformation and done that successfully?
Yeah, one of my favorite examples is actually Ping An, because this was a Chinese banking and insurance conglomerate, and their founder, Peter Ma, said, we're going to get killed by internet companies, right? Alibaba, Tencent, Amazon, we're going to get killed. Finance industry is going to be, completely disrupted. So he hired Jessica Tan, who became, I'd call that the chief entrepreneur. She was actually a co-CEO and has the power to innovate, because that's something that's really lacking in most established companies. They don't give innovation power. Very paradoxical. They say the future is important, and then they don't give innovation power. So Jessica Tan, when she started, her boss, the chairman, Peter Ma, said, Jessica, you're going to fail. Wow, that's a great way to start, right? But what he meant is experiment. You're going to have a lot of failures, but from the failures, the winners are going to emerge. And that's exactly how innovation works. It's very different from running a business. So what you need to create is two spaces. One where you run a business, one where you invent new businesses. And the key is, these two need to live in harmony, because if they're too separate, you just have startups in chains. So that's the key, to have two cultures under the same roof that cooperate in harmony. One managing the existing, one inventing the future. And if you don't get that to work, that harmony, you have startups in chains. You're not going to use, one of the only things that established companies have is these assets, right? Brand, supply chains, customers. Startups don't start with customers. So you have assets. The problem is, today innovation does not always have access to those assets, because they're doing something that is not comfortable often for the core engine.
I think that's a great point, that you need, those ambidextrous companies. So should you take that innovation department and you make a skunkworks far away in some hip part of town and let they run with wild ideas and beanbag shares and
yeah. And so look, there's no company on the planet anymore that doesn't do innovation, right? So the problem is that a lot of it is innovation theater. It's for the show. So it's not the people, smart people. It's not even the processes. They run the right processes. The problem is, these innovation departments often lack power. They're not, if the CEO doesn't spend 20 to 40% of their time on innovation, guess what? Nobody's going to take it seriously. So what we're lacking today is power and legitimacy. And I was just talking to the chief marketing officer, one of the biggest food and beverage companies in the world, and he said, Alex, the problem with innovation is it starts small. And our senior leaders, when they see small, they think it's not important. The problem is, all of those disruptive innovations, those startups, they started small. So what we need to learn is how to manage small, because out of those seeds we grow the big trees. That's the key. And again, because it's different cultures, we need to make that clear to everybody, how this works. And if you plant a lot of seeds and you know how to invest, like a venture capital firm to a certain extent, that's when you get the trees. Because traditionally, companies would say, yeah, we're going to buy growth. We're going to buy these startups. Problem is, they're getting more and more expensive, and many of these startups don't even want to be acquired. They say no thank you, right? So there are multiple examples, where $10 billion offers on the table and the startup says no. So it's not just getting more expensive, sometimes impossible. So what established companies need to learn is how to grow their own, and then sometimes make these smaller acquisitions of startups that might not grow, but that fill a really good need inside of what you're growing internally. So you need to use the full toolbox. Acquisition's still a good tool, but it's only one. And it's one that's getting more and more difficult to pull off in many industries.
And one thing is actually acquiring the startup, but then you need to integrate that into the core. And then you say, as you say, you go back to the antibodies and fighting it. And we see so many examples of big corporations buying amazing startups for them just to die.
Then that's again comes back to managing these cultures under one roof. So what we like to talk about is business model portfolios. So the senior leadership needs to map out the exploit portfolio, the business models they're managing, and the explore portfolio, the business models that are the future for tomorrow. And you need an explicit commitment to what's important. That's what we call portfolio guidance. So your strategy is going to be for both, for the existing and for the future. And you make that extremely explicit how important that is. You support these internal ventures or startups that you invested in or acquired, and you give them protection, right? Because when entities are still very small, so we're back to the phenomenon, right? They're very vulnerable. They can be killed by, the most important business leaders with the biggest business units. But what you need to explain is, and Steve Blank, who invented the whole lean startup movement, has a great saying here. He says, what you need to understand is that managing the existing pays the salary, but inventing the future pays your pension. You need both. So if you're too focused on running your business, you're actually digging yourself a grave. And when it comes to innovation, a lot of companies are good at efficiency innovation, improving what they're already good at, and that's important. But if that's all you do, and you're in an industry with expiring business models, you're going to more efficiently die. So what you need to do at the same time, so I'm not saying don't do efficiency innovation, you need to deliberately invest in the future. And while that sounds so trivial, many leaders don't realize we're doing all this great technology stuff, but we're only in quotes, only improving the existing. So it's not because you're investing in crazy new technologies that you're actually inventing the future, because your business model might be dying. So you need to understand, are there future business models which may or may not rely on new technologies, right? So you need to get a good understanding of that. And leaders, once you explain it that way, understand it very quickly. The question sometimes is, do we have an entrepreneurial leader at the helm of a company, or do we have a good, kind of cooperation, like at Ping An, where they have 3 co-CEOs with very explicit domains? Somebody, Jessica Tan, inventing the future. Once a business is big enough, it leaves this kind of incubation engine. So you just need to have a very clear power structure where you give innovation clout and you make it visible, where the CEO or the co-CEO has a powerful role to play. And if that's not the case, guess what? You're going to lose your best innovation people. That's a fact.
So you say there's one CEO that's in charge of the future. What are the 2 other co-CEOs doing?
At Ping An, so you have one co-CEO who is there to manage the existing and a bridge between the 2. So they all 3 have a very different role and they collaborate, right? It's not like you have CEOs fighting against each other, actually quite the contrary. So it works extremely well. The key kind of challenge that we've seen in any case when we're talking about innovation, sometimes the chief technology officer is the biggest obstacle, because they used to be the center of innovation, but that's often technology innovation to improve the existing. So we've seen a lot of CTOs who've been resisting, new chief entrepreneurs who really look at the future. So R&D is probably not the best center for innovation. It's very good to look at feasibility, to do technology innovation, science, engineering innovation, often products, that improve your existing business model. But when it comes really to the future, you need to build business R&D, which is very different. It's the experimentation with new value propositions and new business models, which again, may or may not rely on new technologies. Best example ever is Nintendo Wii. When they launched it, inferior technological platform compared to the PlayStation and to the Xbox. What did they do right? Value proposition, interesting value proposition, motion controlled game consoles for an underserved market, casual gamers. So with a technology platform with, I would say, bad graphics, hardcore gamers would have said bad graphics, terrible computing performance, they won over a lot of casual gamers, and they built a profit-spitting machine because they didn't have to subsidize the technology. It was off the shelf. So think of it. They made a very profitable business model with inferior technology. So you just need to really think how to innovate. How do you create value for customers and value for your business in a new way? And again, that may or may not use technology. Technology innovation is a small subdomain of the whole domain of innovation, which again, sounds trivial, common sense, but not common practice.
You talked about the CEO and now the CTO, but what about the CFO? Because as you say, things start small. Yeah. You have one part, the core business that makes tons of money, it works. Then you have this unit that loses money every month and every year.
So
how do you convince the CFO?
Yeah, so I think that's the best, that I make a drawing. So let me see if I can pull this one off. So I'm going to go to my iPad and here just quickly draw how this looks. So what you need to explain to the CFO and actually to the entire C-suite is we make several small investments first. So we make many small bets. So I'll take a real example, Bosch, for example. So they invest in over 200 teams over 3 years, okay? But they would give them 3 months and 130K euro, okay? And after that, the team, so during this process of 3 months, they go out, get out of the building, to use Steve Blank's words, and they test their hypothesis. They come back with evidence if this is a good idea or not. So it's not the PowerPoint or Excel spreadsheet that they make shine. They make the evidence shine that supports the idea. And guess what? If they can't find evidence for real customer job pains and gains, their projects get killed. So only about 30%, you can Google it, actually, we have the exact kind of numbers on a blog post, but only about 30% make it to the next phase. And then here you have another, high kill rate. Here you invest a little bit more, like 600K euro. And so at the end, they had 19 winners, 19 projects coming out of these 200 here. So that's how you mitigate risk, right? So you have indeed a lot of, in quotes, losers. At Bosch, they would say they successfully retired projects. So a very high kill rate. So a CFO might say, well, why do we invest in those that don't, that don't work? Because at the beginning, good ideas and bad ideas, they look virtually the same. You do not know. Great ideas on paper, in a PowerPoint, in a spreadsheet, they might be completely wrong. And that's why we don't invest in business plans. Companies that still use business plans maximize the risk of failure because they say, we can pick the winners. Nobody can pick the winners. That's why venture capital invests like this. And venture capitalists are not known to be a humble breed. If they can't figure it out, guess what? It's really hard. So what you do is you invest in a portfolio and you make follow-up bets. And you explain that to CFOs. They understand it very quickly, that the investment mechanism and the metrics you follow, how you invest, fundamentally different from when you invest in a new factory and expanding the supply chain, where business plans make sense. So the problem is we still have companies asking for business plans. What are you doing when you ask a team for a business plan? You're asking them to make you believe they know this idea is going to work and that you just need to execute it. The problem is, again, at the beginning, great ideas and stupid ideas, they look the same. What's hard in innovation is constantly adapting the idea until you have a value proposition that customers care about, until you have a business model that's scalable. And many of those projects will go nowhere, so you need to kill them. So, some companies we introduced the kill rate. One of the top 10 pharma companies, they weren't able to kill projects. So guess what? We introduced a kill rate to make sure they would retire the project, which then often also means changing the culture to make it safe to be part of a project that didn't work out. That's how it works. That's what Amazon, figured out. That's what Netflix knows how to do. That's what Ping An knows how to do. They know how to distinguish between no-go operational failure, we don't want that, and experimentation failure, of which we want a lot. Failure is not the goal, but it's an inevitable side consequence of innovation.
Another important thing is that it takes time to do corporate innovation. I mean, even for startups, but you don't talk that as much about that, because what I see is a lot of executive boards are very impatient. Like, yeah, we've done this for a year now. Where's the money? But it takes, how long would you say it takes for something to go through the whole funnel to actually start making some real money?
A year. So what you need to first explain is that there are different types of innovation and they have different time frames. You have efficiency innovation, which is better processes, very quick wins. You have sustaining innovation, new value propositions for the same business model. And you have transformative innovation, which is radically different business models. So I'm bluntly stealing here from the great ideas from Clay Christensen, right? But once you distinguish these, you can make very explicit how your portfolio looks like. You will also make the time frame explicit. Efficiency innovation can easily happen within a year. Sustaining innovation might be more complicated. Getting real results from transformative innovation, just think Amazon Web Services. Today, that's a profit-spitting machine for Amazon, but it took a lot of time. But they're willing to make long bets. They make many bets, and of those many bets, 1,000 bets, one will become an Amazon Web Service, and they know it takes time. So what you need to do is manage that portfolio and ask, okay, how many quick wins do I need? If I know my leaders are impatient, I focus only on the quick wins. And one pharma company that we worked with, where the leader, Henning Trill, was managing the innovation portfolio at Bayer, he was very clear that before he would go into transformative innovation, he would work on those quick wins to show results. Because at the end of the day, there's no excuse. Innovation needs to produce results. Period. Activity doesn't matter. And sometimes in innovation, for too long, we've been happy with activity. We need to deliver results. So we need to think hard. How can we create quick wins? And how can we create those big multi-billion-dollar long wins? So that is all about portfolio management. We now know how to do it, so it's really a commitment to get there. But it's really fun to watch how some of the smart people in these companies have learned from their past mistakes, right? And are now getting good at it.
So to end this session, Alex, do you have some last advice to the innovators in big corporations? How can they make their companies more innovative? Where should we start? I mean...
So, it depends a little bit where the company is. And again, no company doesn't do innovation, doesn't have, things that are working. I think that the main thing to understand is almost use one of our tools, the value proposition canvas. Understand the jobs, pains, and gains of the senior leaders. Understand their constraints, right? For me, it's easy to talk about what companies should do. I'm not managing a multi-billion-dollar company, but I work with these leaders all the time, and I really try to deeply understand their constraints, their anxiety. What's the challenge? Publicly listed company. How could I make it clear to them that this could be a win for them? And that's always very context specific. So innovation leaders need to first ask, what's in it for the leaders? How do I work with their constraints? Don't try to argue what should be done. That never works. Try to argue how this can help them in their career, in their overall goals, the vision that they have. And if it doesn't fit, if you have leaders that they're not going to do this, change your job, right? Be consequent. Sometimes that's the best thing. If you want to advance your career as an innovation leader, do your best to try to create those conditions. Always good to bring in peers for your senior leaders, because they listen to peers. They listen to outside people. They probably won't really trust you. Even if they trust you, they want to have other voices. But there are enough out there who've really done it. So really focus on what are the constraints for your leaders, and you'll make a huge jump because you'll become the value proposition to them. But see yourself as a value proposition, not as an ideological, innovation guru, because that rarely works.
Well, thank you so much for being part of Ledertips podcast, Alex.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.